So once again, hello everybody. This is our ninth webinar. We started just over 2 years ago, and delighted to have with us today Margaret Michaels and Margot Cameron to present on good organizations, bad apples. As I said to a few of you before, si vous voulez faire des interventions écrites ou à haute voix en français, veuillez le faire entre moi et Margot Cameron and our friend Mark Hodson in the room. We will certainly be able to do translations. On pourra faire des traductions et continuer avec notre groupe dans les deux langues. We have 10 people attending now, and several others who we expect, but out of respect for your promptness, I would like to invite Margaret and Margot to start. So just one more screen here. It's our association, EPAC, which promotes ethical practices in organizations and supports ethics practitioners across the country by various means, and networking and educational opportunities such as this webinar are a way that we go ahead and do that. And let's see, our vision is of a world where people in organizations are ethically aware and act ethically. So please visit our website, benefit from the resources there, and do consider becoming a member if you're not one already. Okay, next slide. So some years ago, I had occasion to work a little bit with Margaret Michaels, and I had great respect for her skills. I asked her if she would be willing to explore this topic with us, and she said yes. And another contact that I've had over many years is Margot Cameron, who works as an organizational change consultant, and often finds herself in situations where she's listening to people go beyond just the org chart and talk about what it is like to work in a particular organization, and has, in my experience, handled those kinds of questions rather well. And sometimes I ask her a question of that sort too. So over to you, Margaret and Margot.
I think you have to unmute.
No, I'm going to. I'll do that here. What did you just do?
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. But you have to unmute me, right?
You are the. You know what? You just. I think you broke your connection.
I think I didn't break it.
Oh.
I think it just did it.
You know what? We have trouble with the. I apologize. We've lost Margot's. Okay.
It can't connect it. So.
But the Margot's audio is not connecting.
No, I'm not connected to the network.
Oh.
It's telling me I can't connect to the network.
I'm sure Margot, I mean.
Okay.
No, I'm not connected to the network. I'm not on the website. You better just put it on your computer.
Yeah, I'll get that going.
We're having trouble.
Connected.
Now I can.
Okay. Does that mean everyone can hear me?
Yeah.
No.
Start from current slide. From current slide.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, everybody. It's Margaret Cameron speaking, and we just reconnected me.
Oh, you don't. Okay.
Okay. Sorry, everybody. I lost my Wi-Fi connection, and we've just been fiddling with it. It's Margot Cameron speaking, and my role today is more as an interviewer than anything else. I'm taking it on myself to sort of ask Margaret some of the questions that I think everybody has in their minds about this topic. Now, what we're addressing today is good organizations and bad apples, and it's looking at how organizations can best talk and deal with the kinds of situations that we've been hearing a lot about lately. What sort of tools can you use? What sort of steps should you take? When should you call in an investigator? What are the steps of an investigation? I'm sure everybody's going to be interested in hearing about that from somebody with a great deal of experience. Plus, we've got a case study discussion, should we have enough time. Now, everyone's aware of the Me Too movement and the fact that many women are coming forward to make allegations which they haven't before. It's brought this whole issue very much to the forefront in a way that it hasn't been before. And of course, I think which we all welcome, but which brings with it a host of issues with which we haven't necessarily had a great deal of experience. So just before we start, let me ask Margaret to introduce herself. She's been in this business a long time, and I think you'd like to hear a bit about her. Margaret.
Well, thank you very much, Margot, and thank you very much for having me here today. My background is in private sector HR. I've been doing workplace investigations since all the way back in 1993. Based here in Ottawa, the majority of the work that I do is for the federal government, various agencies, Crown Court, that sort of thing, and probably take on somewhere between 8 to 10 of these very formal files a year. Part of the work also involves doing workplace reviews, where you don't necessarily have a specific complaint, but nevertheless, there's lots of indications of conflict in the workplace. I do training, I do policy development, that sort of thing. And you may be familiar with the Canada School of Public Service, who puts up all sorts of training for the public sector, for the public federal government. And so I taught all of the harassment-related courses for CSPS, and actually wrote the very first one that they did in harassment awareness. Over the years that I've been doing this, particularly over the past 10 years or so, I've seen that there's the entire field of workplace investigation is growing. There's certainly a lot of awareness in terms of organizations having to do their due diligence and really look after their employees. I don't know what else I can say. I went out and got myself a master's degree in this whole subject a couple of years ago and graduated in all of 2015. So I like to think that my understanding of the issues is really quite current.
Where'd you get your master's?
Athabasca University. I kept my business going. It's an online program.
Oh, that's cool. Well, listen, let me ask the first question that I think people will be interested in, and it's what are the best ways for an organization to articulate their norms and ideals? How should they express them and communicate them so that they'll get the kind of proper behavior they're looking for? What do they have to do? And what works best in your opinion?
Well, coincidentally enough, I actually have some slides on this subject.
What a surprise.
Golly, imagine that.
Just tell me when you want to begin.
Okay, then. Well, you've got that first. Well, the first thing you really have to do is develop a culture of genuine respect in the workplace. A lot of organizations may pay lip service to the whole idea of respect, but somehow there seems to be certain people in the organization that seem to feel they're above and beyond the rules. That's not the case. Respect has to start at the very top, and you have to see it in every level of the organization. You need policies to guide workplace conduct. You need to put down in writing specifically what behaviors will and will not be accepted. You also employers need a process for responding to those complaints, understanding that every complaint needs to be looked at with an unbiased viewpoint. You need to approach the whole matter and with sensitivity to the complaint and the respondent as well. That is the person who has to respond to the allegations against them. We all know that employers have laws. There's laws and rules and regulations. And simply, I mean, people don't walk around with a copy of a law book in their pocket. They need to have the values that are consistent with the kind of values that are attempting to be imposed upon us by the human rights legislation or health and safety legislation. So, all right then, workplace harassment. We can talk a lot about sexual harassment. And, you know, it used to be that when I talked to people and they asked me what I did for a living, I said I did harassment complaints. Everyone thought it was all about sexual harassment. They don't seem to realize that harassment goes on in all different forms in the workplace. Quite often it is what I would call personal harassment, or bullying is, you know, someone's decided they just don't like an individual for whatever reason. So there's the personal harassment, bullying, teasing, tormenting. There's sexual harassment, which is, I think we're all very familiar with that, unwanted advances sexually. And then there's gender discrimination, treating women differently from treating men. And just plain old abuse of authority. People in management thinking that they can throw their weight around to the detriment of their subordinates.
And there's racial harassment as well, and not only discrimination on the basis of gender.
Oh yes, of course,
all of the race,
yes, all of those, all of the grounds covered by human rights. There's, I think we all know. Well, we all know what they are: age, religion, national origin. Sorry, I should have these tattooed on the inside of my eyelids, but I know them so well. In terms of being able to get away with this sort of behavior, often there's people in an organization who are somehow special. You know, in a law firm, it might be the rainmakers, the people who bring in all the business, and a high-tech developer who's got some particular idea or bright mind that the organization relies on. There's often people who have some particular skill that makes them seem a bit above, a bit different from everybody else. And so they're placated and they're catered to, and you know, people pander to them. Bottom line is, even those people need to understand that their behavior is subject to the laws, the rules, the regulations, and they too need to demonstrate this respect for their colleagues and subordinates. So, in abusing one's power, first off, we need to know, where does that power come from? It's not only organizational power. I mean, yes, a manager has more power than a subordinate, that we all know. But there's other sorts of power that can be a little bit more, less obvious. So you have power if you have friends in high places, or you have the ear of someone who is at a high place and listens to you and takes your advice. I once did an investigation where a fellow thought he had all sorts of power because he was the very finest dart player on the team. And they thought, he says, well, they're never going to let me go because I win all the dart games, the other high-tech firms. So it's funny where people can actually get their power from. Now, I've talked already about specialized technical or operational knowledge that the employer requires. Size and strength of people who are simply big. They're very tall. They have deep, booming voices, and they're able to intimidate people who perhaps are just simply don't have a very strong sense of assertiveness. Then there's also those individuals who have a silver tongue. They have very highly developed social skills, and they seem to be able to talk their way out of any situation. They're going to have a tremendous advantage over people who are shy, who are working in their second or third language. You know, they're simply going to have skills that other people don't, that they can use to their own advantage.
You know, it's interesting. I've done most of my work here in Ottawa, which is a capital city. It reflects a lot of the norms around federal government behaviors. And one of the things I've noticed is that you get people who have power if they're willing to misbehave in a way that's not normally socially acceptable. People are so terrified of somebody going off the rails that they'll defer. You know, if they'll start yelling or making a fuss in a way that in Ottawa is just intolerable, they get away with murder.
Yeah, some people do.
It's kind of interesting. Now, does anybody have any questions or comments so far? I just want to test if this can work. You want to raise a hand or make put in a question?
We've received a bunch of comments so far, most saying, yes, we can hear you, and then, uh-oh, we can't hear you now.
Okay, fine.
And then now somebody just said, can I ask a question on text? Yes, you can. Please go ahead.
So we're going to have a question come in on text, and shall we
Yeah.
continue to present while it happens?
Yeah, continue
All right.
now, and then I'll jump in.
I'll change slides.
Okay, great. Going all the way back to the 80s, I think it was, Bonnie Robichaud finally fought her battle all the way up to the Supreme Court. And I think people who are familiar, people in my line of work know exactly what Bonnie Robichaud is. But I'll just give you the 30-second history. Bonnie Robichaud was a cleaner. She worked for DND. She was, at the end of the day, she'd go around and tidy up desks and empty waste paper baskets, that sort of thing. Pembroke, I think it was, or Petawawa. Anyway, so Bonnie Robichaud's boss thought that she was kind of cute and put sexual move on her, and she knew darn well that if she didn't comply, that she would lose her job. Bonnie was a mature woman. She had 5 children. Her husband did not have stable work, and so as a consequence, she put up with what it was that this fellow was asking of her. And it progressed from, kisses or touches to her actually going to spend evenings with him at a hotel. Or when the investigation was done, it was found, I think the phrase that was used, that the degree of compliance or the acts that were committed implied a high degree of acceptance or something along those lines. And basically what the investigator was saying is that, look, you cooperated. You were a willing participant. This is not harassment. Bonnie's point was, I cooperated, yes, I did, but only because I knew full well that if I didn't, I'd lose my job. It took many years, I think about 8 years. She fought her way to the Supreme Court of Canada. And it was at that point in time that they found on her behalf and said that every employer in this country has a legal obligation to provide each and every employee with a workplace free of harassment. So we can thank Bonnie for that. That's at the federal level. So go ahead.
I'd like to cut in with a question here that's come in from one of our participants.
Uh-huh.
And it's a 2-part question. Can someone be considered a bully regardless of their position in a company? And if so, would the victim have a hard time proving this if the perpetrator has a low position?
Well, to answer the first part, yes, the bully can be at any level. And I think that goes back to the slide I was talking about with power. Some people seem to have just different, a high level of personal power. So yes, a bully can be at a low rank. I've done investigations where a manager has actually been a complainant against one of their subordinates. You wouldn't, that's completely contrary to what one might think, but very definitely, someone can, at any level in the organization, can be accused of bullying. Now, in terms of being able to prove what's happened, witnesses are always good. If other employees have witnessed this sort of behavior, and they can be encouraged to come forward, well, then their statements would be taken into account. You need the complainant, the person who's putting forward the complaint, needs to have good, solid examples of what has been done. Has there been yelling? Has there been name calling? Has there been, I don't know, quote, accidentally, unquote, bumping into each other in the hallway or something along those lines? You need solid examples, dates, times, places, what was the incident, and preferably some witnesses. That's how you go about proving.
Thank you.
Okay. Now look at all those. I mean, I'm assuming our participants are seeing these slides, right? Okay. So the laws and on this whole subject, it depends on whether or not your employer is either federally regulated or provincially regulated. Here in Ottawa, we have a whole mess of federally regulated employers, but I think overall in Canada, there's just slightly less than 10% of employees are federally regulated. I think banking, transportation, those sorts of employers are federally regulated. So the laws that look after the federally regulated employees would be the Canada Labour Code, and Part 2 of the Occupational Health and Safety was merged in with that fairly recently. And the Occupational Health and Safety section is what deals with workplace harassment. We have, of course, the Canadian Human Rights Act going all the way back to the 70s, and that deals with those prescribed grounds that we've all got memorized, right? Yes. Pay equity, those sorts of things. But I've also added in there the Treasury Board policy because of all the individuals who work for the federal government would be governed under the Treasury Board policy, which of course takes its cue from the Labour Code and the Human Rights Act.
Are you absolutely sure of that? Are all federal employers, including the military and RCMP, covered by that?
By Treasury Board, DND has, many organizations have their own policy. DND, as you mentioned, they have their own policy too. But for all intents and purposes, the actual definition is very, very similar. There may be a different process in terms of responding to a complaint, but the definitions are there.
We have some people on listening in from Saskatchewan and Alberta, and I think also Quebec and Ontario, people who are not in the federal government. So if you have any comments that you would like to add, either raise your hand or send it in out in the question pane if you want to elaborate on anything about the regime that applies in your area.
And Margaret's going to talk about provincial regulators now.
Yes, that's the next one. So this is, the other 90% of the employees in the country. I'm sorry, I did not understand that we would have a national audience. I thought it was going to be primarily people from Ontario, which is Ontario. So I apologize for that. Human rights, that's way from back in the 70s. That's when the code was first developed. There is an Occupational Health and Safety Act. It's been around since forever, and there's been a lot of updates to that quite recently. Bill 168, 8 years ago, and I can't believe that. Sexual Violence and Harassment Action Plan. This is the one that mandated employers to devise workplace violence and harassment policies and to develop programs to implement these policies. They were mandated to engage in assessments of their workplace to measure what the risk of violence could actually be. They expanded the definition of workplace violence so that it was not just the actual violence, like being punched, kicked, slapped, or whatever, but also the threat of violence. So if there's a perceived threat of violence, that would also be included under that particular plan.
And every province has got a labor code that's got a component in it that
Very
addresses these
similar.
issues. Yeah, and they've all got a human rights, provincial human rights.
Most definitely. It's interesting, like for instance, in Alberta, the sexual orientation was not included as a ground under the act, but under the code, excuse me. But there was a case now, Brand, I think it's pronounced, a fellow who was openly gay. When he became openly gay, the school in which he was teaching fired him, and he fought his case through the courts there. And it was actually found that sexual orientation should be read into the Alberta Code, even though it wasn't explicitly defined there. I know that Saskatchewan has been very proactive in terms of including psychological violence. That's the whole bullying aspect. They've been very good at they've been one of the, I think Quebec was first several years back, but Saskatchewan definitely included that as well. Okay, what else can I say now?
Talk about what employees have to do, no?
Well, I just wanted to mention that it's never okay, the Ontario Action to Stop Sexual Violence. That's a couple of years ago now. This was a 3-year plan, $41 million, I think, and it included very concrete action to help change attitudes in the workplace and provide more support for the survivors of harassment. It had a lot of focus in terms of our campuses, making workplaces and school campuses safer. The most recent one, Bill 132, it required that employers develop and maintain a workplace harassment program in conjunction with a joint health and safety committee. So every employer had to set up a health and safety committee and work with them in terms of implementing what the province had regulated. And I'm sure that the provinces all have their own sites, but I strongly recommend the Ontario Ministry of Labour sites and the human rights sites as well, because they have exhaustive, really, really very comprehensive guides and policies and lots of information for you there. Excuse me, I'm talking so much, my voice is going okay. Another power that came out with the Bill 132 was that the Ministry of Labour, if the Ministry of Labour receives a complaint from an employee, it can mandate that the employer have order an independent workplace investigation. In other words, the Ministry of Labour can go to the employer and say, you will have an investigation done by an independent third party. So that's really good because that opens up the employer's actions to scrutiny. Okay.
No?
Mm-hmm. So what do employers need to do? I mean, we know that there's laws. They know that they're legally mandated, and they know that they're legally liable for the safety and the health, psychological and physical safety of their workers. So as an employer, you need to take the matter seriously. If someone comes to you and says, I haven't, so-and-so is making fun of me, or so-and-so is doing bad things, you have to take the matter seriously. Don't write it off as a personality conflict, or, oh, they're just teasing you. Don't normalize the behavior and say, oh, this happens all the time. Take the matter seriously. And you have to be seen to take the matter seriously. Your employees will watch what management does, and they want to know that management is responding with sensitivity, with care, with due concern. It often I will go into an organization and I'll say, well, have the employees had any training in this whole subject of harassment? And they say, yes, we put all the employees through the training. And the management, oh, well, no, they don't really have the time. Nonsense, absolute nonsense. Everybody's top down needs to have training. So many people there's a lot of misinformation about what harassment is and is not. So management needs to have their own session and to have not just a 1-hour lunch and learn kind of session. This isn't the sort of thing that could be learned in a 1-hour lunch and learn. I mean, really take a day, talk about situations, have case studies. Because what you're ultimately talking about is values. How does one person express their values to another? Do you value women? Do you listen to women when they talk? Do you care about a person's feelings? These are interpersonal values that guide our conduct. So yes, implement the policies and processes. We've talked about that. This is what's required by law. You have to have policies. You have to post your policies. You have to make sure that your employees understand what they do if they feel they're in jeopardy, if they feel that they've been hurt in any way. Yes?
One of our participants wants a clarification here. Did you say that employees and management all should get the training?
Yes.
And what actually happens is it typical that employees get it and management sometimes doesn't?
In some organizations, this is the case. Yes.
Okay, so
Yeah.
so it's not the case that anybody should be exempt from it.
No,
Everybody
it
ought
should.
to, and there are some. Okay, I think that it was just the way you
Okay.
were going on. You know, missed half a sentence or something. So
Okay.
so yes, it does make sense for both employees and managers.
Most very
Yeah.
definitely.
Yeah.
If anything, managers should be given more training because they're the ones with the legal obligation. They're the directing mind of the organization. So it is their actions that will be held to scrutiny.
In a different domain of ethics, the way things have evolved in the United States is that organizations that have not provided proper training in general organizational ethics, and especially areas where there could be fraud and so forth, and they don't have actual offices to deal with things, then they will be dealt with more harshly by the courts, and they'll have more expenses to pay in terms of insurance as well as fines than those who actually prepared themselves. So perhaps that's going to be an evolution here that in terms of workplace behavior, those places that haven't really prepared and trained are going to be dealt with more harshly. That's certainly by public opinion.
My sense is that's already taking place here. That when organizations have taken steps to educate, to inform, to do the right thing, that yes, damages tend to be reduced. And conversely, if organizations have treated complainants harshly, if they've been cruel, if they've treated them badly, there's something called Wallace damages. That's Wallace. It's a case. Wallace. It's just about treating your employees well. Wallace damages will be awarded over and above anything that comes out of, say, human rights or those sorts of court.
Because their track record's been bad.
And they've treated the complainant in a very harsh and inhumane way. They've been deliberately nasty.
And they get into trouble.
Yeah, and they get this additional fines for that.
You know, one of the things that I've run into with harassment cases, and I'm not an investigator, but I do, as Bob said, you end up with it because you're talking about organizational effectiveness, is the issue of remote offices, where you have 2 or 3 employees and no manager.
Yes.
They can get up to awful trouble. And that's part of, I think, not having that management model as a daily presence.
Yes. I think certainly in terms of when an employee comes into an organization, it needs to be made very clear that these are our codes of conduct. I know what you mean, sort of, or many people working from home, or maybe they cover a large geographic territory, so they're out of the office a lot. Yes, you're right. That does pose a particular challenge in terms of making sure they are acting in accordance with the organization's stated values.
Yeah, it's just one of the realities. Well, we've talked a lot about harassment. Maybe you should just spend a moment, Margaret, and talk about what exactly is harassment. So that's the Ontario, but I'm assuming this is kind of a standard definition.
Yes. Engaging in a course of vexatious comment or conduct. So what that means is that any word, gesture, any action could potentially be harassment. Vexatious, that's an important word. Harassment is an active word. It's something that's done to one person does to another person. There needs to be something within that action that is going to harm, demean, put down someone, and make them in some way feel less than they were before. Vexatious comment or conduct against a worker in a workplace because of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or gender expressed. Okay, we're doing specifically sexual harassment here. Where the course of comment or conduct is, and this is the big phrase, known or ought reasonably to be known, to be unwelcome. So that is what we call the standard of a reasonable person. And if, looking at the situation, looking at the facts of the actual incident, if it's determined that in that situation, a reasonable person would have known that this comment or conduct was vexatious or hurtful in some way, then you find that harassment has taken place. Because a reasonable person needs to be aware of the impact of their actions upon others. You can't say, oops, didn't mean it like that. Didn't mean it. Oh, no, she's just taking it wrong. Gosh, what's wrong with her? She doesn't have a sense of humor. No, you can't do that. Everybody is responsible for the impact of their actions on other people. And if in an investigation, intent, we never look at intent. Intent's simply not a factor. We look at what is the impact upon the recipient, the victim of this particular comment or conduct. Okay, so it's going to be a hurtful action, a hurtful a comment, or something that's done to someone else wherein the individual knew or ought reasonably to have known was going to be unwelcome. So that's one definition. And the other one is what we call a quid pro quo. It's a tit for tat or whatever. They're making a sexual solicitation or advance where the person making the solicitation or advance is in a position to confer, grant, or deny a benefit or advancement to the worker. So what that means, and again, we have that standard that the person knew or ought reasonably to have known that the solicitation or advance would be unwelcome. So what that means is if you are in a management position or if you are in a position over the individual towards whom you are making this solicitation, you are, by virtue of your position in the organization, setting up this quid pro quo situation. In other words, if you don't do this for me, I'm going to make your life difficult. If you don't, I don't know, hang out with me and have drinks or you know, get close to me, I'm in a position to deny you a promotion, give you really dreadful shifts, or you know, put you on the night shift forever, say bad things about you, tell my buddies at the top of the organization that I don't think you're working out, that sort of thing. Okay, that's a quid pro quo. So either of those situations would constitute sexual harassment according to the Ontario legislation.
I've never noticed this before, Margaret, that it says in a workplace.
Mm-hmm.
So if you make the comment or behave in a certain way and it's not in the workplace, what happens then? Suppose you're on a conference or you're having drinks after work one day.
Whenever you are in a situation that is work-related, that constitutes workplace. So if you're out with a group of people having drinks, you know, with your coworkers after work, that would constitute
Still counts.
workplace. Oh yes, of course, in conferences, seminars, that sort of thing. It's not geographic or it's not a physical workplace. It's, what's the other word for that? So,
Yeah, whatever. It's the environment in which
yes,
you work.
That's right. The,
and the people you work with.
So yes, these setting up this quid pro quo or that sort of thing, if it takes place outside of the workplace, let's say on a Saturday night, people go out and have a bit too much wine to drink or whatever, and things get difficult. It doesn't mean you can show up Monday morning and like pretend it didn't exist. Of course, it's going to have an impact.
Because you still have a power relationship, whether or not you're in or out of the office.
Exactly.
Okay. So what about here?
Here we go. This is what Treasury Board says. And again, very similar to our earlier definition. Improper conduct by an individual. And again, this is why a person, harassment is something that one person does to another. Improper conduct by an individual directed at and offensive to another individual in the workplace. And it includes any event or location related to work. Well, we just talked about that. And that the individual knew or ought reasonably to have known the cause of offense. So, only different thing to add there is about directed at. We need to have a recipient. And I shy away from using the word victim. Victim is far too value-laden a word. But directed at the person who ultimately becomes the complainant. It may be that your boss is saying rude things about another person. That's not harassment. That's inappropriate. It's wrong, but it's not harassment. We need to have We need to have that directed at clause in there.
Should I go on?
Okay,
I think you've just addressed this.
yes, probably.
Any questions, any comments? Just want to take a pause here and make sure that nobody's raising a hand or wants to make a comment. Well,
we've had 4 or 5 questions so far, and I've asked them from our audience. So I'll just ask one further clarification question that I thought of. When you talk about the reasonable person and people's views about what's reasonable in terms of friendliness and so forth, it occurred to me that one does in human affairs get misinterpretation of communication. One does get misinterpretation of signals. And if I smile and make a complimentary remark to somebody who thinks that I'm going overboard by doing so, then I feel I ought to be told that by that person, and I have to pay attention. If I do it a second time, that would show that I had failed to really take the reaction seriously. And at that point, not the first time, but at the second time, I think my behavior really ought to start being questioned. Would you agree with that?
On general principle, yes, I would. I think it's really unfortunate that people become so hypersensitive to this whole issue that we can't joke and give a compliment or something. I mean, this is part of working together. You need to be able to relax with your coworkers. But I think in terms of giving a compliment or asking questions that may be sort of slightly beyond the bounds of day-to-day professional interaction, you do need to be very cognizant of your audience. To give a compliment, to say something nice, again, I would say that no, that really wouldn't necessarily constitute harassment. However, each and every incident has to be assessed on its own values. So you could say, oh, that's a really lovely dress. Or say, hey, that's a really lovely dress. You know, like, I mean, it's the same words, same fact, same thing spoken, but that tone makes all the difference in the world. So again, you have to assess it. Bottom line, if you've been told that please, no, let's just keep things professional, and you choose not to do that, you have crossed the line.
but you've been told.
Exactly. You ought reasonably to know. You've been told.
I always think this is kind of hard on guys because we know that they haven't got the same radar system. Okay, I'm passing on.
Excuse me, Margot.
Yeah, that was an unsuitable remark. I take it all back. So the next few slides, I think we've addressed. Did you want to add?
Just read it out loud and make sure that you covered it.
All right. And so, yes, in terms of what constitutes sexual harassment, we talked about words, actions, gestures, emails. You can send cheeky emails or texts, photos. The bottom line is, if those things are unwanted, they could potentially be seen as sexual harassment. It can be a one-time event. That being said, the event would have to be really quite severe. Okay, they would, in terms of sexual harassment, they'd probably have to be some sort of physical contact or perhaps. Oh, okay.
Margaret,
yes.
if I could bring this back to our last exchange, and you had the reasonable word there before, can reasonably be seen, the reasonable person or criterion. If the one event could reasonably be seen to be open to various interpretations,
Mm-hmm.
then it ought to be pursued. But if every reasonable person would say, no, that's not a serious one, I think that the one event it's probably the reasonable person that comes back into the single event. If every reasonable person would say, good Lord, if you grabbed that person's arm and didn't let go for 30 seconds, despite the person saying, I really am not comfortable, stop it, and everybody could hear it. Well, every reasonable person would say that one event is serious.
Did a case recently where two people were in an elevator going 2 floors, and there managed to be some sexual harassment during between the 14th and the 16th floor. He said, no, we're good friends, you know. She was open to that. She said, no, he can't touch me, it's my body. So perfect, he said, she said. Good job, there's cameras in the elevators. So anyway, one-time event can constitute harassment if it's severe. More often than not, there's a series of events. It's like increasing in severity. And as I mentioned before, this is a very important point. Intent is not a factor. It's the impact upon the complainant that is the primary consideration when we're looking at does this particular action constitute harassment. You can't say, oh, didn't mean it that way. That just doesn't fly. Another thing, overt objection need not be made to establish that harassment has occurred. There are many situations wherein someone simply cannot come forward. They can't say, you know, they are feeling harassed. They would really like it to stop, but they know full well if they say it out loud, leave me alone, that bad things are going to happen. So again, we go back to our original, you know, definition. Was it unwelcome? Was it directed at? You know, should a reasonable person have known? So although overt objection is desired, we understand there are circumstances wherein that's simply not possible for the complainant to do that. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah, it's all yeah.
Right. So it can take place on or off work premises. We've talked about that. Quid pro quo. That's the power imbalance. When someone is in a position to deny or grant any sort of benefit. Lateral violence among employees. This is when there is no organizational power imbalance. But and this goes through the question that we had earlier on: can a person claim sort of horizontally, sideways in an organization? And very definitely, yes. Often in an organization where management is not proactive and the employees have no one to go to, they wound up taking out their frustrations on each other. And Margaret, you probably see this a fair bit in your organization.
Yeah, and that's when I talked about the remote office. That's often what happens. You've got employees working together in a small office without management attention, and they start fighting, misbehaving among themselves.
Yes.
I've really seen it. Well, let me ask, in your experience, Margaret, what's the most effective approach to communicating how you expect people to behave? Because there's a lot of policy. Your reaction to that is? Oh.
Policies are not enough. They really aren't. You can have all the rules and regulations and manuals that you like. If the management of your organization does not walk the talk and hold other people to walking the talk, it's not going to fly. It's just not going to work. That's the only thing people don't walk around with a policy in their hip pocket. They really don't. They need to act. They need to have taken deep in their heart the values and ethics that the employer wants them to have.
And I'll tell you something I've noticed. Did I interrupt you? Sorry.
No.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's just often what really helps managers and employees, but managers in particular, there's an expectation that managers will respond to bad behavior.
Yes.
And I mean, this is obvious. And the managers themselves wish to do it. But what you have militating against that successful thing is a long cultural tradition in Canada, at least, of not addressing conflictual issues publicly. And so what you get as a manager in a situation where he or she knows that they should say something, but they haven't got the script. So one of the things I often find myself doing is giving people a script so that they don't have to think what to say, they've got it. And it's something along the lines of, what you just said, so-and-so, has made me feel uncomfortable. I think it might be considered harassment. And I don't know how so-and-so has responded to it, but I, watching it, don't like what I see. So it's a very simple thing, and you'd expect most people to be able to do that. But in my experience, it's quite helpful. I just had a conversation with a friend of mine who's a woman of my age, which is to say well and truly experienced. And she's a senior manager. And a board member comes on to her. And my God, if she didn't have the script to get him off, she ended up going on a date because she couldn't think how to say bugger off without putting herself in jeopardy. All she needed was a script. Oh, my audio connection has been lost.
Are we up there then?
Okay.
Can people hear us now? We just lost the Wi-Fi. Can you let us know if we're still going out?
Are we, we're
We're
okay,
back?
Good.
Okay, perfect.
Okay.
Okay.
Go back from.
All right, so you probably missed our brilliant conversation about how managers need to be scripted. But we'll go on and we'll repeat that if we've got enough time.
Well, I think we have, excuse me, we talked about this earlier on. Anyone in a management position, and I'm talking anyone supervisor and up, is part of the directing mind of the organization. So you, as a person who is responsible for other people, you have a heightened responsibility under law to act in accordance with, a respectful workplace, to be cognizant of your employees' psychological as well as physical safety. You need to be aware of what exactly these responsibilities are, and that's why I'm talking about management taking the training in harassment. They need to understand the laws. Be cognizant of what behaviors constitute harassment. Often in organizations where people work together for 5, 10, 20 years or whatever, the workplace becomes like part of an extended family. Some people hold on to their jobs longer than they hold on to their marriages. It's just that's so that you tend to relax, you tend to know the people that you're working with very well. And it's possible to get kind of sloppy and to forget that no, wait a minute, this is a professional environment, and we need to be conscious of where exactly the right and the wrong, the right and the wrong is.
And what about responding to a complaint? What's the best way to respond to a complaint when it happens?
Respond quickly, respond with empathy and caring. Okay. First off, you need to have your homework done so that you've got your policies and procedures in place so that when this catastrophe happens, when a complaint is brought forward, you're responding from a script. You're not responding, oh my God, what am I going to do now? You have a course of action in place. So listen, don't say, okay, sorry, I'm on vacation for 2 weeks. I'll get back to you when I'm, no, that doesn't work. Have a chain of individuals who are capable of responding. Sit, listen, talk to the person, understand the situation. If in any way the complainant feels that they are physically or psychologically at risk, separate them. Organizationally, definitely, they shouldn't be reporting to someone they've got a complaint against. And physically, you put them on a different side of the floor, on a different floor, have them work from home, at least for the duration of the investigation. And if it just so happens that you happen to have any plans in place to promote or fire anyone, take a look at those plans and maybe just put them on ice for a bit for the duration of this investigation. I've run into situations where a fellow on probation, knew he was going to get fired, who hadn't made it. So he put in a harassment complaint against his boss, knowing that it would take a good month or two to get the harassment complaint finished. And by that time, he would have passed his probation, period. So they had to fire him within the first 3 months. So there's all sorts of devious things that can go on in an investigation. But I would just say that it would be very unfortunate if someone were to lodge a complaint of sexual harassment against a manager, and then prove that manager is promoted a week later, it's just not going to work.
What about the issue of separating the parties? I often notice that it's the complainant who gets moved.
Yes.
What do you find? What do you think about that?
Often the complainant is the person who's lower down on the totem pole, and they are simply easier to move. Fair, does it?
No, it doesn't look good.
On the other hand, you can't really, you have to take the respondent's life into consideration. And it's by moving the respondent, sometimes it looks as though it's guilt until proven innocent. And I think that's part of the reason, part of the reason for perhaps moving the complainant. Some organizations I know in the federal government, they sent on special projects, or they might be sent on French language training, or they're sent somewhere just to get them out of the workplace. Ask your parties if they're, who's open to what, who's open to. I know in the federal government, investigations can go on for many months. I've had multi-party investigations go on for 18 months. And really, they can actually drag out that long.
So it can have quite a severe impact on the organization if, for instance, both parties were moved.
Yes, and operationally, if you lose you lose your leadership, if you lose the manager, operationally that can be very difficult. I strongly recommend that everyone have ready access to a lawyer. It's unfortunate, but that's just the way it is now. In terms of the employment laws become so specialized and such a rocky road that you really do need to have someone to help you navigate. Investigative expertise. Trusting an investigation to someone who doesn't have training and experience in the field is a very dangerous thing. It's not just a matter of asking questions. There's a fair bit to understanding. Obviously, I'm biased in that, right? Because I'm an investigator. But I take great issue with people who don't have any sort of formal training or in this area being given the responsibility because there's an awful lot at stake.
Margaret?
Yes.
One of our participants has asked something about the RCMP and Treasury Board policy. And if the Treasury Board policy applies to them, then what's been going on? From what we hear, it seems that there's been a lot of harassment that's gone on for a long time and really hasn't been addressed. Has there been a problem about the nature of the investigations or what?
I have very limited knowledge of the RCMP. What I can tell you, what I've learned so far, is that there's a culture of protecting the members. I think there's no doubt that women have been treated differently in the RCMP. I mean, they've been part of the RCMP since the 70s, right? But there's so much coming forward. We're looking at thousands upon thousands of women coming forward saying that they have been sexually harassed, they've been denied promotions, that sort of thing. The investigations, I'm sure that many investigations would have been done internally. I think maybe Brenda Lucky's on the job as of Monday. So maybe she will ensure that all investigations are done externally. I know that the RCMP does contract out investigations. And I'm waffling, so I really don't have a sensible answer for you.
Well, thank you. That's fine. Thank you.
I think it's just there's a culture of protecting each other, protecting the very fine reputation the RCMP has enjoyed. So, where were we?
Keeping parties informed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Let them know. Like, for instance, when I do an investigation, I'm going to interview the complainant first, then the respondent, and I'll always say, look, I've got an appointment booked with the respondent for Friday morning. Just be aware that I'm going to be in, and the respondent's going to be being interviewed. So just keep them informed as to where things are in the investigation. I'm interviewing witnesses. I've got my report drafted. I've sent my report to management, that sort of thing, just to let them know that how things are moving along. I think that when a decision is made, management needs to get back to the complainant and respondent and let them know the decision. That yes, harassment was found, or no harassment, or it was a split decision. Some allegations for the complainant, some allegations for the respondent. And let them know whatever sort of, if there's disciplinary measures, and what any sort of remedial measures would be. Also, there's a workplace, no matter how discreet you try to be in the investigation, it's very disruptive to go into a workplace and start asking employees to basically rat on their colleagues. You know, what did you see happen? And then they're in the horrible position of having to say, yes, I saw such and such. And that's dreadful, because we have to keep on working with these people. So remedial measures should also incorporate something to help restore the camaraderie within the workplace. And the unions, work well with your unions. Don't get into battles with the unions. When investigation, make sure the unions have input into who is doing investigations, because there are always going to be better and worse investigators.
Well, how about the question of when you should actually do an investigation? At what point do you know this requires an investigation and it requires a professional investigator? Like, what are the when should you do it?
To my mind, you need to look into a situation wherever you become aware, because that's your legal responsibility. That is your due diligence responsibility. And when I say an investigation, I mean you can have an internal party look into a particular situation, or you can hire someone from the outside to go and have a look at the situation. And you'll need to make a judgment call as to whether an internal would be appropriate. Certainly in smaller organizations, that can be very problematic, because you know, as I said before, the investigator still has to work with the individuals, and to find against your boss may well be a career-limiting move. You know, so it would depend on the circumstances. But to my mind, as soon as you become aware of something, look into it. Now, when Bob first approached me about doing this webinar, he said, we will have a forum to talk about the Canadian Association of Workplace Investigators. I've been in this field for 24 years now, and as I mentioned, in the past 10 years or so, I'm seeing more and more people get into this line of work. I routinely get calls from people asking me if they can come and apprentice. There is no formal certification for becoming a workplace investigator. Treasury Board runs, Canada School of Public Service runs a course for investigators. Public Works has a list of approved investigators. That's just gone out for renewal, just about to be renewed actually. And then certainly in the private sector, anybody with a business card and a good line of patter can say, yes, I'm an investigator, I'll look into this. And that to me is a very frightening situation, it really is. I became aware of an organization in the States, the Association of Workplace Investigators, which started up in California about 8 to 10 years ago. And I started beating the drum here in Canada and saying, we need something like this. We need an organization like the Association of Workplace Investigators, nonprofit, volunteer-driven organization dedicated to enhancing the professionalism of workplace investigations. They do seminars, they do online seminars, they do a week-long institute where they have specialists come in and talk about various aspects of investigation. And I'm delighted to say that we're all the way up to about 70 people here in Canada now. And there's another branch starting up in Australia. So moving right. So anyway, if you need to hire an investigator, you can have a look at the principles of that are on the CAWI website. Oh, goodness. We're good. How are we doing for time?
We're fine.
Talking
No, no, no. Okay.
We're good.
And talk about natural justice and procedural fairness.
Okay, if you're investigating. So I'm not sure when we lost when we lost you. Well, one thing I did say is that if your investigator cannot define procedural fairness and natural justice, don't hire them. These slides, I understand, Bob, that they will be on the website afterwards, so you can, get out your old Latin dictionary and see if I've translated that properly. But bottom line is, the investigator needs to be darn sure that respondents are fully informed of what it is that they've been accused of. They need to be able to prepare a defense and get back to you. The complainant needs to be able to present their case. They need to be able to submit exhibits or name witnesses or whatever. They need to be able to present information. And essentially, I mean, no one should be a judge in their own case. Well, for heaven's sake, I hope that's pretty common sense. Okay. Is there,
And just any questions? You know what's going to suffer will be the discussion of the case study, and I don't think that's the end of the world. We're not running out of time. Any questions from our participants? Any comments? Keep going?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the next thing that we wanted to ask about is what are the actual steps in an investigation? How does that usually proceed?
Typically what happens is the organization will phone me and say, well, we've had this complaint, what are we supposed to do? Sometimes there will be a complaint in writing, often there is not. So the first step is to find out what the actual nuts and bolts of the complaint are, what are the allegations. So I would get some general information from the employer. Some employers that have very formal processes will demand something in writing. They will give this document or a redacted version of this document to the respondent and ask for the respondent's version of events. Some organizations will offer mediation to the parties at that point in time. Mediation may work in some circumstances, but mediation is predicated on people coming together as equals to sort out an issue. And the bottom line is harassment only takes place when there's an imbalance of power. So I kind of wonder about how useful that might be. As an investigator, let's assume that there's a written complaint. I'll get the written complaint and I'll then meet with the complainant and go through that in lots and lots of detail, getting all sorts of background information about the organization, how long they've been there, what their education is, just really get to know the person well so I really can get inside their head and understand why it is that they feel they've been mistreated. Same thing with the respondent. Where's the respondent coming from? What was that person thinking? Why did that individual think that it was fine to do what they did? And at that point in time, you see sort of what, in terms of the story, what matches, what doesn't, and then go out to third parties to sort out what could potentially have happened. I mean, essentially, you will get a he said, she said situations, and for those, you really have to look at who's telling the more credible story. And that's where understanding the organizational context within which people were interacting can really help you come to a decision as to whether or not you're going to find harassment occurred. So, okay, so it says here in the second bullet here, interview complainant, respondent, and witnesses individually. In a unionized environment, these individuals are often given the opportunity to have a union rep with them, which is good. Or a support person, maybe to bring their sister or something. But as long as it's someone who is not at all involved in the actual harassment or could not potentially be called as a witness. So you gather and you review any sort of documentation. These days, people tend to have an awful lot of emails and texts. They bring in, photographs they've swapped on their phones. If it's if there's issues about I've been treated differently or whatever, you might look at timesheets. If they say they've been given all the crappy shifts, then you look at timesheets. They say that they did brilliantly under the former boss, but now the new boss is treating them badly. Take a look at performance reviews. So these are any sort of documentation that could possibly be relevant to the allegations. Take a look at the information, assess the facts. And you take those facts and you assess them against the definition. Was it unwelcome behavior? Was it directed at the complainant? Should the respondent ought reasonably to have known that the conduct or comment was inappropriate? Then at that point, simply prepare a summary. I give a methodology. I show the evidence. I say, this is what the complainant said. This is what the respondent said. This is what the witnesses say. This is what the documentation shows. You analyze it all and come to a decision.
And what about if you find that, in fact, misconduct has occurred? What responses do organizations have?
Again, always based on the nature of the circumstance. And I think part of a good report will always give you the employer mitigating circumstances, the mitigating factors that need to be taken into account when you decide what your next steps are. If there has been a finding of harassment, there needs to be some sort of a negative consequence for that, such as a discipline. And this could be anything from a slap on the wrist and don't do it again, right the way through to being fired. It all depends on the severity of the action. Often organizations will send people home. They'll give them a suspension, a couple of days off without pay. They put a note in the personnel file. They may be given a demotion. Say, no, you're just not cut out for this. Or they'll send them off on some sort of assignment, get them out of the workplace. In terms of the complainant, whatever wrong they have suffered needs to be rated. If they have been denied a promotion, if they have been subjected to humiliation and embarrassment, there needs to be something done to help restore that person to where they would have been had they not suffered the consequences of the action. I talked earlier on about doing remedial work with the actual organization post-investigation, because it is a very disruptive and unsettling time for people. So the idea of having focus groups and saying, okay, we've had this conflict in our workplace, what do we do now? What are we going to do? And encourage the actual working unit to try and look forward and come up with a cohesive view of going forward.
So often I think organizations try, once it's over, try to pretend it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very dysfunctional response because it turns into the elephant in the room. Everyone knows about it and talks about it.
Very definitely.
So are you saying that when discipline when there's been a disciplinary action,
mm-hmm.
that ought to be publicized in the organization?
Sorry. I have up there note to personnel file. I should have expanded on that. I think that all the documentation related to the investigation needs to be kept separately. But if there is a discipline as a result of the finding, then there needs to be a note on the personnel file saying what that discipline is. Not anything about the actual investigation, but simply a statement as a result of finding an investigation, the following discipline has been implemented. Now, out of respect for the respondent or the person who is being disciplined, no, you can't talk about that publicly. That would be wrong.
Wouldn't you let the complainant know?
The complainant needs to know that discipline has taken place, but I don't necessarily think they need to know that it was 3 days without pay. They need to know that the organization has taken action. So often what complainants really want is they just want it to stop. It's just, like if they get an apology, great, that's wonderful. But that's typically what they just want it to stop. So some organizations will actually release a copy of the report to the complainant and respondent. Some organizations will redact it and then release a copy of the report. Some organizations will simply tell them the results, but they don't get a copy of the report. It really is up to the employer. Your due diligence obligation is to do the investigation, to right the wrongs. But how you do that is you're given some latitude.
If the organization decides that organizational learning and organizational healing would be well served by letting everybody know that after a substantiated complaint of X, action was taken, and that kind of action involved the following. So everybody, this needs to become part of your understanding of who we are as an organization. Is that allowed, or is that?
I would think there would. Well, in a unionized situation where everything tends to be public, perhaps it may be appropriate for the union to say action has been taken, or for the employer to say action has been taken. But I would be very cautious about saying what action was taken. You can say there has been discipline implemented, and we're moving on. But you don't say, yes, Bob was given 3 days without pay.
Right. What if the accusation could not be substantiated? Should the accuser know that, or would it just make them feel worse?
If harassment is not found to have occurred,
Or can't be substantiated. It's a little different.
Well, okay, and we can get into a long conversation about that, but me personally, I would never do an investigation and not come to a decision. And if maybe other investigators do, but I mean, bottom line, I feel I'm being called in to make a determination, and that's what you're going to get. That's just my standard. Sometimes you make it on concrete facts, or you make it on the balance of probabilities, on a credibility finding, or you make it on your gut from having done this for 24 years. In each instance, I will tell the employer that's exactly how I got there. And if it's a gut feeling, I'm sorry, but this is my best call. Anyway. So, okay. The question: if it's found not to have occurred or can't be substantiated, well, yes, they need to know the outcome. That's only fair that they need to know the outcome. That doesn't. If a case has been unsubstantiated, that means that what? The witnesses, they weren't able to find witnesses. Geez, I'd have a hard time accepting that as their report, because, like, how much did you dig? You know what I mean? Like, an investigator's job is to find out the facts. There's got to be something they can find out to help tip the scales one way or another.
Does the organization owe the complainant an explanation of what that person's next steps could be in the event that their complaint has not been upheld? Should they say to them, well, if you don't agree, here's where you go now?
Maybe potentially a lawyer or a union's opportunity to give that advice. I don't know what recourse there is. I mean, it depends on the situation, obviously, but they don't really have a lot of recourse within the organization. If the organization's done its due diligence, done the investigation, no harassment was found, sorry, that's pretty much what you wrote. So unless it happens again and a second complaint is lodged and you're beginning to form a pattern, you know, maybe then the second investigation might find something.
Unless you go to the police.
Yes, if we're talking sexual harassment, yes, you can definitely go to the police.
Okay, well, we're rolling into the end of the time, and as I said, what we're going to cut will be the case study. So it was a goodie, and I'm sorry we can't discuss it, and it could be that you could do another webinar using a case study, Eva.
Could you bring up the next one? Well, yeah, this is at the point at which we had hoped to look at the case study. We have not used it before. It was written especially for this session. So I believe everybody online has received it. So I'd say we, even more sincerely than other times, we'd like your feedback about this session. Include what you would like EPAC to do further on this topic. It's fairly likely, I'd say, that more can be done to help our members in areas that this is touched on. So what more would you like us to do? Should it start with perhaps a discussion of the case study, as Margot just suggested? The other point I'd like to put in is that, speaking very selfishly as the author of the case study, I'd really like your editorial suggestions, and because I've made a little initial agreement with Ryerson, the business ethics area, which has a bunch of case studies, and they're interested in having a case study of this sort. So I said, well, you know, I could supply this, but I'm not going to supply it until I've heard back from other people whether they think it can be brushed up in any way, or what the gaps are. So please let us know. We've only received written comments. Can I just have anybody put up their hand on your little control panel and let me know if you'd like to speak, and if so, I'll let you in on it. But I'm going to count to 10, and if nobody raises their hand, then we'll go to our last slide. Well, I guess that's enough time. We had one question. Could you please repeat, Margaret, what was the name of the organization for workplace investigators? Tell us again.
Yes, of course. It's simply called the Association of Workplace Investigators. The American website is awi.org. The Canadian one is Canadian Association of Workplace Investigators, or cawi.org. And so you will find lists of members there. It's you can join and get a weekly email update on things that are happening in the whole world of investigation. And there's a section up for American, Canadian, Australian news. But certainly things that are of interest to Canadians would be in the section. Legal developments, interesting new cases, that sort of thing you'll find in there. And as I mentioned, they do have seminars, online seminars, webinars that you can sign up for. Quite useful.
Okay, well, then let's see. Here we go. I'm trying to send a message to somebody. Now what? Okay. So we'll go to the last slide, and you can use the question box or send us an email afterwards to please rate the webinar and tell us how we can improve on these EPAC webinars. I know that we can improve in terms of reliable technology. But anything else that you would like to suggest? This is the first time that we've tried it in a sort of a conversational manner, let us know how that worked for you. It's also the first time that we tried a case study, but then we didn't try it. So I guess we can't get your comments on that. And what topics should be covered in future EPAC webinars. So please send the comments to us. And unless there's any further comment that I see coming up in the question box, then I think that I'll thank Margaret Michaels. You've brought us a lot of good information and insight from 24 years of experience. I know I can't just go out on the street and say, does anybody want to talk about this off the top of their head. It does take a lot of experience, and thank you for bringing that to us to help us understand this better.
Very welcome. It's been a pleasure.
And thank you, Margot Cameron, for working with Margaret to develop a good sequence of items and to bring in a more conversational tone to our experience today. All right, thank you very much. And just as a very last thing, the slides will be on our website. We try and put it up as a recording. That takes us a few days. And here one person has asked, did you see my question? Is it possible to get a copy of this slideshow? I found the information valuable and would like to share it with our ethics committee. Yes, we'll do that. But if you send me an email, again at that website that you see, saying that you'd like to have the slides separately from the recording, then I can do that as well. All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
That was very true. Yes.